Hi. Welcome. I'm honored to be up here and stand here. Tonight I have less of a sermon for you, more of a story to share with you. So I want to share a bit tonight of my life story with you. Not because my story is any less or more important than anyone else. I'm very conscious that I stand here in the pulpit, which is the place we preach the Word of God, and we do not preach ourselves. But I want to tell my story tonight because I'm very conscious that I am not the main character in my story. I'm conscious that God is the main character in my story, leading and guiding and acting and moving. And so I want to share a bit of my story with you tonight because in my life, God has given me beautiful gifts. I often reflect on just how incredibly blessed I am to have lived the life that I've lived so far, with the family and the friends and the opportunities that I have been given. I'm astounded by the life that I have led so far that God has given me. And so I want to share a bit of that with you tonight. And my hope is this, it's simple. My hope is that my story helps you love God more. Because I have found that there is nothing more beautiful in life than knowing and being known by God. If you take one thing away from tonight, I want it to be that there is nothing more beautiful in life than knowing God and being known by Him. Now, I'm a teacher, so I have set up things with 3 points, like a good sermon, good lesson. But they're really sort of 3 overlapping themes, 3 overlapping stories. So it's not exactly a linear story that I'm going to tell you, but we'll move back and forward from little child Steve to me, adult Steve, and look at 3 areas that God has just blessed me incredibly. 3 gifts that God has given me. And these are, I think, areas of life in which God loves to habitually bless us. These areas are the people that God brings into our life. So the heritage we receive, the influences in our life, the people who speak into our life and bless us. Also, God Himself, coming to know God more deeply. I'm going to share a bit about why I study theology, why I love it, why I'm passionate about it. When I tell people that I study theology, I get mixed reactions sometimes. Sometimes people are a bit quizzical about why I'm so excited about theology. It's a big part of my life, obviously. Spent the last several years in university, so I want to share a bit about why I love theology. And finally, the area of loving God with our whole hearts. That God loves to bless us when we come to Him with all we are, with all we have, with our whole hearts. That will be my final area that I want to talk about. I have each one of these areas corresponds, I think, hopefully not too forcibly or artificially, to a verse from Psalm 145, which I use to sort of frame my story. So if you want to turn there, that's where we're going to begin. And I hope that this psalm sort of frames and animates the whole of what I have to say tonight. I don't know if you're turning, but I guess people have cell phones now. So this is Psalm 145. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. I will extol you, my God and King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you and praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall commend your works to another, and shall declare your mighty acts. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works I will meditate. They shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They shall pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness, and shall sing aloud of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and his mercy is over all that he has made. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and all your saints shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to the children of men your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. The Lord is faithful in all his words, and kind in all his works. The Lord upholds all who are falling, and raises up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food in due season. You open your hand, you satisfy the desire of every living thing. The Lord is righteous in all his ways, and kind in all his works. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desire of those who fear him. He also hears their cry and saves them. The Lord preserves all who love him, but all the wicked he will destroy. My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord, and let all flesh bless his holy name forever and ever. Amen. Now let's just pray before I begin. God, we lift up your name, and we thank you for your goodness, your kindness towards us, and your gifts. And I pray tonight that as I trace your hand throughout my life and share what you have done, God, that you would be lifted up, you would be glorified, and God, we would be drawn to love you more. In Jesus' name, amen. So the first area I want to look at, the first sort of story I want to tell, is heritage and influence, the heritage I've received, and the role of influence in my life. One generation shall commend your works to another, and shall declare your mighty acts. I have been really blessed to have a long Christian heritage in my family. My grandfather was a pastor for over 50 years. Served for a long time as a minister. And especially these last few months, I've been reflecting more and more on his influence in my life. My grandfather passed away this past April, just 4 or 5 months ago. And my grandfather was a remarkable man, because my grandfather's whole life was ministry. And by that I don't mean that ministry was his whole life, although he did sacrifice much in ministry to the church. Him and my grandmother, we found out, lived on remarkably little through several decades of ministry. But that in everything he did, in his relationships, in his life, he acted as a minister of the Word of God. And this included his relationships with his family, and me as his grandson. I didn't always come to Bethel. I'm not 14 years old. For the first 13 years of my life, we went to what I thought of as Grandpa and Grandma's church. It was a little church downtown Hamilton, on Wilson and Emerald, if you know it. And there, I thought of it as Grandpa and Grandma's church because Grandpa preached and Grandma played the piano. And that was where I learned what faith was, where I came to know God first, and where Grandpa and Grandma's ministry spoke into my life. They also took us to Brayside, which some of you may have heard of. Yeah, that's a joke, sorry. And also to It's this place called Elam Bible Institute in New York State, which you may not have heard of. And at both places was where I was still very young, 8, 9 years old, really encountered the power of the Holy Spirit. And that was part of Grandpa's ministry, was ministering to his grandkids as well, taking us to camp, building us up in the faith. And that's part of the heritage I've received, which now, after my grandfather passed away, I've reflected on more and more. Back New Year's Eve, just a few months before he passed away, I was blessing with my wife and my brothers to the hospital to see my grandpa. And even though he was 91, and even though he had just had 1.7 liters of fluid taken off his lung, there was still strength in him, which we know comes from the Spirit. And it was very obvious, it was very evident to us that he knew he was giving us his last words. And he spoke with the boldness, with the strength, which comes from the Lord. And to see our 91-year-old grandpa, after 50 plus years of ministry, lying on a hospital bed, weakened by his breathing problems. And yet to hear him speak, all he wanted to say was to encourage us about the joy that is to be found in serving Jesus. About the blessing of spending your life giving it all for Jesus, serving the Lord. And how incredibly blessed he had been in his life to do that. He knew he was speaking these last words to us. I'm so thankful for that heritage. My own parents, of course, raised us in the faith. If you know my parents, you may not be surprised to hear that my mom was the more vocal one in this. My dad is a bit shy, reserved. But I have realized that both were equally influential growing up. My mom more vocally, my mom was the one who was, teaching us things, instructing us things, disciplining us in things. Very often we weren't the most obedient children, 3 little boys. And so when I think of my mom in childhood, that's what I remember are the words. But when I think of my dad's influence on my faith growing up, I have this very persistent and repeated memory that whenever I would happen to wake up early as a child, 5:30, 6 in the morning, and go downstairs, always, there would be my dad at the kitchen table, eating his Honey Nut Cheerios, with the Bible open in front of him, every time. That's the most persistent childhood memory I have of my dad, my father, his faithfulness, his constancy, and devotion to God. Even though it was a quieter example, I realized that both my mother and my father have given me this heritage. And influence is both. Influence is both passive and active, both quiet and open and intentional. And I'm thankful for both parts of my heritage. And of course, influence occurs outside of families as well. Perhaps the most important influence on my faith growing up was actually my own youth pastor here at Bethel. When we first started coming here, the first 4 years. Pastor Tabernacle, who some of you may remember, is just a remarkable man of God. And it's from Pastor Ted that I really learned what it means to step out in faith, to risk things in faith in pursuit of God. Pastor Ted was always challenging us, always pushing us out further in reliance on God. From him I learned what it is to live faith with passion, to hunger for the things of God, to stand with conviction. And it's really because of his influence that ever since I've served as a youth leader. Because I saw his ministry intersect my life at a crucial moment. since then, I wanted to serve with youth, to intersect their lives at crucial moments, to encourage them to follow hard after God. Hey guys. I just want to say that you guys are remarkable, seriously. That I am constantly in awe of your guys' hunger and pursuit of God, and how you are constantly in prayer, are constantly looking to go further with God. Keep doing that. Life is beautiful with Him. I'm so thankful for the youth that we have in this church. They're incredible. I'm very thankful we have a new youth pastor as well. Very wonderful. I'm encouraged. I think of heritage and influence as sort of a set of intersecting circles and lines, if you can sort of picture that image. That sometimes influence is gradual and slow, that the people we live with, share space with, influence us over time, make us into the people we become. But influence can also be like a line. We're in a certain moment, at a certain time. Someone speaks something into our life, which moves us in a different direction than we were headed. And I'm thankful for both of those in my life. Now, when I think of my studies in theology, it's more the lines than the circles that I think of. And this has been an interesting part of my life. So this is the next area I want to talk to you about, the study of theology. And this is the verse that I think speaks to this area. On the glorious splendor of your majesty, and on your wondrous works I will meditate. I chose this verse because I think this is what good theology is. After like 9 years of studying, so I've come to this. That good theology, let's move on. Good theology is a kind of meditation on who God is, the glorious splendor of your majesty, and on what God has done, on your wondrous works. But when I first started reading and getting into studying theology, this wasn't what I recognized at the time. So I kind of came into studying theology through a bit of a back door. When I was in youth under Pastor Ted's ministry, I became really active in sharing my faith with my friends in high school, which is really good. But that verse that says, speak the truth in love? Sometimes I forgot those last 2 words. It was a bit more about speaking the truth than about speaking the truth in love. And so the thing was, I wanted to know all the answers so that I could convince all the people to love Jesus. So I read and got into all these arguments with people, and I wanted to know the truth. I wanted to know all the truth about all the things so I could convince all the people. And so I was reading all these books, and I remember Pastor Ted lending me this book called The Cost of Discipleship by which is this incredible book. He lived in Germany during the Second World War and opposed the Nazi regime, and eventually was executed for his opposition. Just an incredible man of God. But none of that about the book was what grabbed my attention. What grabbed my attention was that he believed in baptizing babies. And this really grabbed me and threw me, because I was like, well, this is really odd. Bonhoeffer obviously loves Jesus. And he has lots of good things to say, but why does he think this silly thing about baptizing babies? And it threw me because I wanted to know all the truth so I could convince all the people. And so if Christians disagreed about things, so that was really bad. So I started reading, Luther, Calvin, Aquinas, all these old theologians, so I could get my grip back on answers, so I could know the truth again. So I was a bit thrown, and Pastor Clark maybe remembers that time a little bit. It's nodding. But I wasn't always speaking the truth in love or in humility most times. Redeemer is Christian University at Lancaster, excellent school. If you guys don't know where you want to go to university, I recommend it. Wonderful place. But my decision to go there to study theology, a lot of the people who were influential in my life didn't quite understand that at that time. Because they figured that, a good Pentecostal kid should go to a good Pentecostal place. And that's where they were pushing me. But I knew that God wanted me at Redeemer. I knew that that was a place for me, where He wanted me to go study theology. And so that was a bit difficult for me, actually, at first. That I was going without the support of some of the people who were influential in my life. But God really worked through me at Redeemer. And He did a couple things. The first was that when I went to Redeemer at first, I believed that God was calling me into ministry to be a pastor. And God showed me that my gifts were more in teaching than in pastoral ministry. So God began to guide me and direct me in a slightly different but related area. And the second thing that God did was show me how beautiful theology is. How beautiful it is to study God. When I was in high school, as I was saying, theology was, I use this image of, theology was almost sort of a sledgehammer for me, that I needed to know the good theology so I could sort of pummel people into believing in Jesus. And God showed me sort of the last two words of that verse about speaking the truth in love. And I came to see that good theology is less of a sledgehammer and more of a kind of meditation, as this verse speaks about, or even a kind of worship. That's what I really think of theology as. Good theology is a kind of worship, or worshiping God with our minds, as we meditate on who He is and what He's done for us. Now, as I was finishing up at Redeemer, I knew God was beginning to call me into teaching. And so I wanted to do my master's, PhD, go further with my education. But I was at a bit of a crossroads. I'd always grown up in Hamilton. I loved and still love the city. Hamilton's an incredible place. So my heart was still here in Hamilton, and I contemplated staying here. But this is where two sort of lines of influence crossed my life. Two professors who I actually didn't know all that well, actually. God used them to speak into my life at that crossroads and push me further towards following God courageously. I was contemplating staying in Hamilton, going to further studies here instead of applying abroad, applying elsewhere. And one professor really challenged me. He said, I challenge you unequivocally to go to the best school you can get into, the most difficult place you can go, because that will drive you to your knees in prayer. That will drive you to the place where you're living in reliance on God and not on yourself. And the second professor, I've actually only met once. I had a 20-minute conversation with her one time, but it was one of those moments where someone speaks into your life, a line of influence. And she was a professor, so she shared with me her own fears and inadequacies of studying, doing her master's and PhD. And she taught me an important word. Since I'm a teacher, you get to learn this word with me. Pusillanimous. Do you want me to repeat after me?
Pusillanimous.
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 Pusillanimous. Okay. So this word, it means lacking courage and resolution, marked by contemptible, timidity, fearful. And it comes from Latin, fun fact. From two Latin words which mean tiny-souled. Tiny-souled. And she told me, this professor, that Aquinas contrasts pusillanimity with courage. With courage, which is what we should have. And the example that Aquinas uses for this is Moses. Moses before the burning bush. That's the example of someone who's pusillanimous, who's lacking courage and resolution. Moses is given this incredible task by God. And before this task, Moses is fearful. And funny enough, this 20-minute conversation with this person I met once, along with this other professor, God used those people to push me into pursuing God in the most difficult schools I could get into. Gave me the courage to follow God as high and as far as I could go with my studies. So I've been incredibly blessed through that. That I got my master's overseas, and somehow actually ended up getting my PhD recently from the top theology department of the UK. It's actually ranked higher than Oxford and Cambridge, which is pretty remarkable. Thinking back to where I began, that God would use people to push me into the most difficult place I could go, the most serious study of His Word and His truth, to stretch me beyond my own capacities. And so I study theology because I love God, because God is beautiful. And I teach theology because I want others to love God too. I've been so incredibly blessed to teach on Wednesday nights. Thank you, Pastor Clark, for that opportunity. It's been such a confirmation for me that teaching is my gift. God has really used that. I'm thankful. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works I will meditate. And this kind of theology, the good theology, the kind that's a meditation on who God is and what He's done, is actually the kind of theology that goes on forever. Because we forever get to live in an unfolding wonder at the majesty, the glory, and the splendor of who God is and what He's done. That kind of theology, that discovery, that knowing God will never end. And for me, that's just the most beautiful thing. That we get to go on with the God who loves us and wants us to love Him in return. And so the last area I want to talk about is love. You open your hand. You satisfy the desire of every living thing. David says, you open your hand, God, and you satisfy the desire of every living thing. So my final overlapping story is about love. And actually on Friday nights, our new youth pastor and summer youth were saying some very wise things about this topic. So I'm excited to share a bit of my story with you. Good job, guys. So you know the end of the story. My lovely wife is sitting in the front row. So that's the end of this. Well, obviously the story keeps going. But that's where the story is so far. You know the end of this story, or the present of this story, but maybe you don't know the end. Some of you, I told the story I used before, but I get to share it with you now. That God, in fact, took me on a pretty intense and amazing and freeing journey to get where we are now in marriage as well. And I really believe that marriage would not be what it is without God first taking me along this journey. And so we're going to go right back. Our story begins with little Steve. You know, like 6-year-old Steve or something. How old are 6-year-olds like this? Yeah, okay. So little Steve always liked girls. some little boys go through a stage where girls have booties and are gross. But I agree. One of the few things I still remember from kindergarten is making some girl like paper crown because I thought she was a princess. Adorable, right? Really sweet. And so from very early, my picture of my future, my dreams, were to get married, have a family. And so, fast forward to university, I'm at Redeemer. And one day, out of the blue, totally unexpectedly, I have this thought that sort of speaks into the back of my mind. And this thought is, what if I'm supposed to be single for the rest of my life? And I distinctly remember laughing, because I thought that was a hilarious thought. But an odd thing happened, which is that the thought continued to come back and to press. And so I was like, oh, well, that's a bit odd. This ridiculous thought would keep recurring in my head. So I did what was a very dangerous thing, and I began to pray about it. And after a couple weeks of praying about this thought, I figured out that maybe God was actually calling me to this. Maybe God actually was wanting me to be single for the rest of my life. And this was terrifying. This was totally unexpected and awful, and just the worst thing that could have happened. But if God was calling me to it, then I'd better do it. Because we all know the story of Jonah. And so eventually I was like, okay God, if this is what you want, then you know best. And I remember after a couple weeks of praying about this, I went to a young adult service with Pastor Adam Fry. You guys remember him maybe? And he happened, coincidentally, to be preaching on sacrifice. Now, I found in life that sometimes God influences us like a circle, slow, gradual, shaking us. And sometimes God shoots arrows straight into our heart, speaks to us very convictingly at a particular moment. And for me, this was one of those arrow moments, where I knew the jig was up. I knew that God was calling me, speaking to me. So I was like, okay, you want me to be single? That sounds awful, but you are God. And so I said, okay, I will be single for the rest of my life. And the next 6 months were the darkest months of my life. Just awful, super depressing. Because I had always had a dream of getting married, having a family. That was always how I saw my plans and my future. And so after 6 months, I actually told God, nope, not doing this. This is too hard. Sorry. And I just sort of did the Jonah thing. I sort of chartered a boat and began sailing. And went back to being interested in girls. And for about 2 years, I was on this boat. And then after, although all the time, the funny thing is, I think when you're running away from God, you know that you're running away from God. And God's Spirit is still working you, pulling you, drawing you. And so after a couple of years, on some stormy waters, there was a dumping. I use that word intentionally. And I knew at that time that God was calling me back. And so I was like, okay, I give up. You win. But actually, this second time, committing to singleness was totally different, absolutely different. I was completely at peace with it, almost miraculously. And that time was one of the most beautiful times in my life, because through that time, God really changed my heart. God really spoke to me about what it is to know Him, to find our happiness in Him alone. What it's like to lay everything down. Absolutely all our plans, all our dreams, all our desires, and just be happy in God alone. And there's this quote from Thomas Merton, who's actually a Catholic monk, so he actually knows a lot about lifelong singleness. And he says, "In solitude I have at last discovered that you have desired the love of my heart, O my God, the love of my heart as it is, the love of a man's heart." And that's what I discovered in this time. That God wanted my heart. That God wanted my heart just as it is. And that God wanted all of it. Absolutely all of it. Now, you know the ending already. Obviously, I'm not still single. I'm very happily married to Valerie. And that's its own wonderful story in itself. But before we move on, I want to say, before we jump too quickly to conclusions, that's one of like grandpa's sayings, jumping to conclusions. That it was actually really important for me that I believed that this was something God wanted for me for my whole life. Because I discovered through this process that the issue was that I had always wanted control over this area of my life. That I was like, okay, God, what I study, what I do, where you lead me, that's okay. I trust you, you can have that. But girls, I know what I want. I'll take care of that one, God, because I didn't trust God with that part of my heart, with my plans and my dreams in that area. And so God actually had to do this pretty radical thing in order to get all of my heart, because I had been holding it back from Him. He called me to this radical sacrifice. I had to believe that it was actually for my whole life. Because if I knew it was just for a few years, then I could pull the move that, oh, okay, that's okay, I'll actually have these few years of my life. But I would still be holding on, still just waiting. God needed to grab total control in order to have all my heart, in order to bring me to the place where I could discover happiness in God alone. And Kierkegaard puts it in this pretty dramatic way. Next slide. That only the one who draws the knife gets Isaac. And I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Abraham and his son Isaac. That Abraham and his wife are well advanced in years. Sarah is definitely postmenopausal, not having children. Abraham has no heir, but God promises him a child, a son. And miraculously, the son is born. The son of promise, the son to inherit everything God's going to give to Abraham and his descendants. And then one day, as Abraham has all his hopes and dreams invested in his son, all his future is in Isaac, God says, Abraham, take your son, your only son, whom you love, and go up to Mount Moriah and sacrifice him. And if Abraham had not done that, if he had refused to sacrifice his son in order to hold on to his hope, in order to hold on to his future, he would maybe have a son, but he would not be Isaac. He would not be the child of God's promises. It was only through obedience, it was only through Abraham making the 3-day journey up to the mountain and laying his son on the altar and drawing the knife that Abraham actually got Isaac, the child awash in God's promises. Only the one who draws the knife gets Isaac. And I found it was the same in my life. That I had to actually draw the knife on my own hopes, my own plans, what I wanted with my life, that area of control I wasn't letting God have control of. I had to draw the knife over it bind it with wood and lay it on the altar. Absolute freedom of my heart, this ability to find all my joy and all my happiness in Him. And so I want to challenge you today. What is there in your life? What very good thing, what absolutely best thing is there in your life? It can be a plan, a vision, even something that God has given you, a calling. What is it that you have made into its own thing, you have made into an idol, that you need to bind with wood and lay on the altar, that you need to draw the knife over, in order for God to give you the very best, in order for God to restore it to you, give it back to you. So I went through this pretty dramatic experience. And it was so absolutely liberating in the end when I finally surrendered. And through this remarkable change of events, God gave me Valerie, and now we're wonderfully and happily married, which was something totally unexpected because I was actually totally happy being single at the moment when God brought Valerie into my life. And that has been something totally beautiful, such a total gift in my life, that God has brought Valerie and I together. Because the funny thing is that I did not need Valerie in my life. Valerie doesn't complete me. I think that's actually one of the most dangerous myths of our culture, that we need another person to complete us. We need to find our happiness, our completeness in God alone. And out of that place, we're free to give our love to others in the most healthy way. Amen? So I want you tonight, hopefully, to love God more, to find your happiness in Him. So let's come worship the God who gave us everything, in whom we find all our desires